So in the previous segment, we were leading up to some of the great recent cataclysms that have been happening on Earth. All of us. Let's say I'm in my late 50s. There are people on been around for 90 years or so. They heard stories of something happened with their grandfather or whatever. Krakatoa. Anybody remember that? 1893 or 1883, I believe it was. Blew out. The next year, there was so much dust in the air that places far away as North America had like really, really short, almost no summer. It starts snowing in July or whatever. So, recent stuff. Recent. And now, because of the population, it can affect a lot more people. Now, go look at my calendar over here. One of the cycles that have been talked about a lot is Nibiru. Now, I believe there's a lot of different cycles. There's a lot of different things that are happening. It's not just Nibiru. It could be, there's other comets, there's the sun's position, and all that. So, if you look at a conjunction of a number of events, because when I did predictive astrology, and I can get into that another time, but with the right kind of calculations, and you get multiple synchronization of significators, multiple things, not just, well, this means that, or Mars here means this. Anyway, so Nibiru supposedly has a cycle around 3,600 years, and if we're about to get Nibiru again, then let's look back. And again, it's not precise. It could be like 3,621 years. It could vary. It could be affected somehow on its long orbit, and maybe it comes back earlier, or it might come back later, and depends on where our position is. And whether, if there's another, if there were another system with a brown dwarf very far from us, and around that sun there were a bunch of planets, and some of their outer planets intersected occasionally with our outer planets, even if it got close enough by gravity, some very interesting kind of stuff could happen. And maybe it could, for example, every system is not just full of a few planets and moons, it's full of like a whole bunch of stuff. Lots of rocks and debris and all kinds of stuff. And so that could get flung off, gravitationally. It doesn't even have to come from near us. It could come and be flung off from a system that's far away. Now, if ancient people found out that system was in such and such a direction, that every time, for example, we know there's certain times of the year we get these certain meteor sort of showers. Like, wow, we're going through a period. Could have a planet shower or like an asteroid shower, something really big. Now, going back to 1600 BC, roughly, supposedly the Chaldeans identified the zodiac. Now, that's probably more of a traditional. I think they identified a lot longer than that, because 1600 BC, they built the pyramids supposedly long before that, and they knew about that. I really doubt that at all. But anyway, Chinese writing, the Olmecs in Mexico were thriving. New kingdom in Egypt. Egypt was happening, man. 1500 BC, Akhenaten, reading this thing. The Shang dynasty begins in China. 1600 BC, the end of the second period of Stonehenge. Stonehenge, trying to figure out where they are in space. They put up a lot of stones. After a number of years, they get their facts. Okay, well, this one, now, instead of putting a stick, now that one is stone, a bigger stone, because that is an anchor stone, because we know, where these positions are now. If the Earth had tilted on its axis, and they had to re-site the planet, just find out their calendar again. You see, that could happen. Now, Sumerian Babylonia solar eclipse recorded in 1375. 1450, the end of the Minoan civilization. Now, we know what happened in the Mediterranean. There was a massive flooding. A number of volcanoes, Mount Etna, they're all over there, Vesuvius. It's been a real active region in the Mediterranean, and we've had plenty of tsunamis and floods. So, now, 1300 BC. So now we're getting in the period. Now we're trying to figure out what happened now here. The Thera eruption, 1050 BC. The volcano on Hekla, 1159. The comet Phaethon impacts. There we go. See, 1159 BC, comet Phaethon impacted, and there was a massive volcano on Hekla. And a cold period starts in the Mediterranean, 1159 BC. That's not that long ago, 3,100 years. That's interesting. Something really major happened 3,100 years ago that affected the climate on a massive scale. That's not that long ago. Okay, now we're getting in, late period in Egypt in 1000 BC. The Zhou dynasty begins in China, and Saul, king of Israel, first king, around 1000 BC. So there was their millennium. Whatever they were calculating, if they're going from the Christian calendar, King David in 1002, there was their millennium, putting on their new king because of their legends in their calendar. The Upanishads, well, I believe they're much older than that. Abandon the Stonehenge of estimate, 1000 BC. Now, what was going on here? King Saul and David, the Zhou dynasty in China, and Stonehenge. Maybe I think it was the comet. Remember the climate changed in the Mediterranean. Maybe it turned really cold or something there. Then Solomon's Temple in 900. Maybe they moved south. The people who knew about lining. There are people who, again, when I do historical research, it's really hard for us to comprehend the way people saw race and gender and all that. People tend to be marry within each other's thing until there was a lot of wars. But it was more the people who had information. I mean, there were smart people in every different kind of race and culture. I mean, there's always that way. I mean, there were people of very different character and behavior and culture, but they had their geniuses for sure. And they had their leaders and they had their, smart people. And so they had their technology, different kinds of technology. Now, we're getting in close to solar eclipse in the Middle East at 800 BC, 760, Homer's poems. Okay, now, how old were Homer's poems? 750. We don't know if they're recent or he was telling a story, but it seems to me that after a lot of cataclysms, remember we had a big, huge problem in 1159 BC with a comet and eruptions, volcanoes, the later period of Egypt. Egypt was going downhill, China was going uphill, King David was put on the throne, Solomon's Temple, things start to stabilize. They build a temple, they tell the stories. In 740 BC, apparently Isaiah started, okay, now, in 700 BC, interestingly enough, at the time of Isaiah, according to the Hindu calendar, it's the beginning of the Dark Age, Kali Yuga. So Isaiah's warning and prophesying. Then 648 BC, Babylon's destroyed. So Isaiah was prophesying and bang, and then a comet hit China in 600 BC. And then Buddha came, and the Greek science, the collapse of the Assyrian Empire in 600 BC. Now, there was a stability and a decline, and now things have to start.